For 11 years, two sisters in the Arkansas Ozarks kept their own father chained to a post in the cellar beneath their house. Neighbors knew, the postman knew, a deputy drove past that hollow twice a month and did nothing. When the state finally sent people up the mountain to pull the old man out, they expected to find the usual story. Cruelty, neglect, two women who had lost their minds living alone in the trees. That is not what they found. The sisters were calm. They were clean. They had fed him every single day for over a decade. And when the investigators asked them why they had done this to their own blood, the older sister looked at them and said something that made two grown men walk back up the stairs and sit in their truck for a full hour before they could speak. She said they were not keeping him from the town. They were keeping the town from what was under him. The place is called Culp Hollow. You will not find it on most maps, and the ones it does appear on spell it 3 different ways. It sits in the folded country south of the Buffalo River, where the ridges press together so tight that the sun only touches the valley floor for a few hours a day. People have lived up there since before Arkansas was a state. They kept to themselves, buried their own dead, and answered to no one. The Renfro family had been in that hollow longer than anyone could remember. Silas Renfro was born in the house his great-grandfather built, and he raised his 2 daughters, Effie and Junior, in the same 4 rooms. Their mother died when the girls were small. After that, it was just the 3 of them, and the land, and the quiet. By every account, Silas was an ordinary man for most of his life. He farmed a little, trapped a little, and kept to the old ways, because the old ways were all he had ever known. He was not cruel, and he was not strange. The people who remembered him from town described a soft-spoken man who paid his debts and took his hat off indoors. Whatever happened to him did not come from inside him. It came up out of the ground. In the fall of the year, everything changed. Silas decided to dig. He wanted a proper root cellar, deeper than the shallow dugout the family had used for generations. He picked a spot behind the smokehouse where the ground sounded hollow when you stamped on it, and he started down with a mattock and a shovel. Effie remembered the sound of it. Her father working alone in the dark before dawn, day after day, further down than any cellar ever needed to go. 6 feet, then 8, then 10. She said she would wake to the scrape of the blade against stone and lie there listening, and something about the rhythm of it made her afraid in a way she could not name. On the 9th day, the scraping stopped. Silas came up out of that hole, white as paper, and would not say what he had found. He filled the supper table with silence. That night, for the first time in his life, he locked the doors. And in the morning, the hole behind the smokehouse was not a hole any more. It opened into something, a wall of fitted stone, dressed and squared, running off into the dark under the mountain. Stone that no one in that hollow had ever laid, stone that was older than the family, older than the town, older than the maps that refused to name the place. Effie was the first of the 2 to see it in daylight. She followed the fresh dirt out past the smokehouse and stood at the lip of what her father had dug, looking down at a doorway. Not a cave, not a natural seam in the rock. A doorway, cut square, framed in blocks the size of coffins, each one fitted to the neck so cleanly that no gap remained you could slide a fingernail into. She called down to her father and got no answer. He was already inside. And from that morning on, he belonged more to the thing under the mountain than he ever again belonged to his own daughters. And before we go further, I need to pause for a second, because what I'm about to tell you gets significantly darker. And I realized a while ago that some of this cannot be fully explained in a video format. The complete reconstruction of what the county erased from the Culp Hollow record. The survey that shows a foundation no one ever built. The sheriff's field notes from the night they went down into the cellar. The names and dates of the 3 men who sealed the shaft and signed off on the lie. I put it all into a written document. It's linked below and the QR code is on your screen. Now let's continue. Silas started going down at night. Effie and Junior would hear the cellar door and the slow drag of his steps into that squared-off dark, and he would stay for hours. When he came back up, he was wrong. Not sick, not mad, but wrong in a way that took them months to put words to. He stopped sleeping. He stopped eating anything cooked and began taking his food raw. He spoke less and less, and when he did speak, it was in a cadence that did not sound like him, low and even, as if he were reading aloud from something the girls could not see. Then the hollow began to turn. The first thing was the animals. The Renfro dogs would not go near the smokehouse. Then they would not come out from under the porch at all, and one morning they were simply gone, all three of them, no tracks, no sound in the night. The chickens stopped laying. A neighbour's milk cow, grazing along the property line, dropped dead in the field with no mark on it, just lay down and stopped. People started to notice that the closer you came to Culp Hollow, the wronger you felt. Headaches that split the skull. A ringing under everything. Children who lived within a mile of the Renfro place began waking in the night, screaming about a man made of stone standing at the foot of their bed. And Silas kept going down. Junior was the one who followed him. She waited until he was deep in one of his long nights below, and she took a lantern and went down after him, past the 10-foot mark, through the squared stone mouth, into the passage under the mountain. She never told her sister everything she saw down there. What she did say was this: the passage did not belong to their world. The walls were fitted without mortar, huge blocks cut so clean the seams would not take a knife blade. There were markings, not writing exactly, but something like it, that hurt her eyes to hold on. And at the end of it, in a chamber her lantern could not fill, her father was on his knees, in front of an opening in the floor, talking down into it, answering it, and something down there was answering back. She understood then that whatever was under the hollow had been sealed once, on purpose, by people who came before, and her father had unsealed it. The people of the valley below knew more than they ever admitted. This is the part the county worked hardest to bury. Culp Hollow had emptied out once already. Back in the 1800s, a whole settlement gone in a single winter, the survivors scattering down the mountain and refusing to say why. The land was surveyed, condemned, and quietly struck from the plat books. The families that stayed in the valley kept one rule, passed down without explanation. You do not dig in the hollow, you do not open what the old people closed. The valley remembered it the way people remember a warning whose reason has long since rotted away. They only knew that their grandparents had come down off the mountain with the colour drained out of them, that they had never once spoken of it again, and that the single instruction they left behind was a door. Leave it shut. Silas Renfro was the first man in 4 generations with the pride to ignore them. By the time Effie and Junior understood what their father had become, he was barely their father at all. He would stand at the cellar door for hours with his hand flat against the wood. He would speak to the thing below in the small hours, and the house would fill with a pressure that made their ears bleed. Twice he tried to leave. Once he got as far as the road that ran down toward town, walking in that slow, even way, headed straight for the houses full of sleeping people, and Junior found him and turned him back, only because he still, somewhere, knew her face. They knew what would happen if he ever reached the town. They had felt it themselves, the wrongness that came off him now, the way the world curdled around him. Whatever was under the hollow wanted out, and it had decided that Silas was the door, so they did the only thing they could think of. The same thing their ancestors had done to the passage itself. They sealed him, they put a chain around him and fixed it to the post their great-grandfather had set in the cellar wall, and they kept him there, below the house, above the seal, dark in the one place in the hollow where the pressure seemed to hold him still. They were not protecting themselves. They had made their peace with dying up there. They were holding a door shut with their own father's body because they were the only 2 people left alive who knew the door was open. For 11 years they held it. They fed him. They cleaned him. They read the old family Bible aloud through the cellar door because Effie believed the sound of it kept him tethered to the man he had been. And every few months when the deputy drove past, they smiled and waved and let the town believe whatever it needed to believe, because the alternative was to explain what was under their house. And no one would have believed that until it was far too late. What finally brought the outside world up the mountain was not the father at all. It was a letter Junior wrote and never should have sent to a cousin down in the valley. That said too much. Before we move on to the night the investigators went down, stop for a second. What you just heard about what Silas dug up under the smokehouse is the part that changes everything. But it only makes sense when you see it written out next to the original county survey. The sealed shaft, the vanished settlement, it's all in the document linked below. Take 5 seconds right now, grab it, and then come back. Because what comes next builds directly on it. The link is in the description. QR code is on your screen. Code. The letter reached a cousin who did not keep the old rules, and the cousin made a call. And the call climbed a chain of offices until a county sheriff and a state investigator drove up into Culp Hollow on a grey morning in early spring, expecting an elderly man in danger and 2 women who needed help. They found the sisters waiting on the porch. Effie and Junior did not run, and they did not lie. They said their father was in the cellar. They said he was chained, and they begged the 2 men not to unchain him. The older sister did most of the talking. She told them plainly that the man downstairs had opened something under the house, that he was no longer entirely their father, and that the chain was the only thing standing between the town below and whatever was waiting at the bottom of the shaft. The sheriff, a practical man who had seen every kind of mountain tragedy, took this for the raving of a broken mind and told them gently that no one was staying chained in a cellar, not on his watch. Then he opened the cellar door. Everything he wrote in his field notes after that reads like a man trying to talk himself back into the world. He understood. He described the cold coming up the stairs, cold that had no business in an Ozark spring. He described the old man at the bottom, kneeling in the dark, not looking at them, his lips moving without stopping. He described the sound underneath the house, a sound he first took for running water and then understood was not water at all, a slow, deep working sound like something enormous turning over in its sleep. And he described the moment his flashlight found the far cellar wall, and the squared stone mouth behind the post, and the passage running off into a black that his light went into and did not come back from. The state investigator made it 3 steps down and would go no further. The sheriff went all the way to the bottom. He put his hand on Silas Renfro's shoulder to raise him up, and the old man turned his head all the way around, farther than a neck should ever turn, and looked at him and spoke in a voice that the sheriff swore in his notes was not one voice, but many, layered under one another, coming up from somewhere below the floor. He never wrote down what it said. He wrote only that after he heard it, he understood the daughters completely, and that unchaining that man would have been the single worst thing he ever did in his life. They did not unchain him. Here is where the record splits in 2. There is the story the county tells, which is short and clean and merciful. Silas Renfro was found in poor health, removed from the home, and died shortly after in a state facility of natural causes. The daughters were determined to be unwell, treated with sympathy, and released to relatives. The house in Culp Hollow was condemned as unsafe, and the land was closed to the public. A sad mountain story with a quiet ending. Everyone goes home and sleeps fine. And then there is the other record, the one the 3 men who went back up that mountain a week later did not sign their real names to, because someone did go back, a small crew, quiet, with county authorization, that does not appear in any public file. They did not repair the house. They did not recover anything of value. They went down into the cellar, and they went into the passage the old people had sealed, and Silas Renfro had opened, and they closed it again. They poured the shaft full. They collapsed the smokehouse over the top of it. And they took the survey that showed a dressed stone foundation under Culp Hollow, a foundation no settler ever built, older than the county, older than the state, older than any history a schoolchild is allowed to be taught, and they filed it in a place where no living person would ever think to request it. This is the part that should keep you up at night. Not the man in the cellar, the map. Because if you go looking for the oldest surveys of that country, the ones drawn before the plat books were cleaned up, you find the same thing again and again all across these mountains. Foundations under the hills that predate the towns standing above them. Squared stone in hollows where no one ever recorded building anything at all. whole settlements that emptied out in a single season and were struck from the record with no reason given, no cause of death, no forwarding address. Historians will tell you those gaps are just the ordinary loss of old paper. But the paper is always missing in the same shape, always the same kind of place, always the deep hollows and the sealed hills, and always the same instruction handed down by people who watched something they refused to name. The people who came before us did not simply build over the old world. In certain places, they buried it on purpose. They found what was already down there in the ground, the fitted stone and the squared passages, and the doors that should never have been doors, and instead of showing it to the world, they sealed it, condemned the land, and rewrote the map so their grandchildren would inherit the silence without ever inheriting the reason. It is not a conspiracy of one county in Arkansas. It is the quiet work of every generation that ever stood at the mouth of something older than themselves and decided the only safe history was the one that leaves it out. There is a name people have started giving to this pattern, though the old families in these hollows never needed a name for it. They just called it the world before. The idea is simple, and it is terrible, that the ground we walk on is not the first ground, that underneath the counties and the courthouses and the tidy dates in the school books, there is an older layer, drowned and buried and deliberately forgotten, full of stonework we could not reproduce today, and doorways that were sealed by the last people who understood what they held back. Every so often the earth shifts, or a flood scours a hillside bare, or a stubborn old man with a mattock digs 9 feet too deep, and a piece of that older world surfaces. And every single time, without fail, someone in a position of authority makes the same decision the old families made. Cover it, condemn it, strike it from the record. Because the alternative is to admit out loud and in writing that the history we were handed is a curated thing, edited down to only the parts that let us sleep. Culp Hollow is one seam of it. There are others. If you spend enough time in the reading rooms of little county archives, in the boxes that never got digitized, you begin to find the redactions yourself. A survey line that stops at the edge of a hollow and picks up on the far side, with nothing named in between. A settlement counted in the census one decade and gone the next. No epidemic, no fire, no explanation. Just a blank space where 100 people used to be. A plat map with a rectangle of dressed stone marked clearly, and then, in a later and different hand, crossed out and relabeled natural rock formation. The corrections are always in a different ink. And the corrections are always the same lie, told over and over across 200 years and 1,000 miles of buried country. Silas Renfro broke the rule, and his 2 daughters spent 11 years of their lives fixing it with the only tools they had, which were a chain, a post, and the willingness to be called insane, rather than let the truth walk down the mountain into a town full of people who would never believe it until it was already standing in their kitchens. Effie died a few short years after they took her father away. Junior lived a good deal longer. Late in her life, she spoke to exactly one person about what happened in that hollow. An old woman she trusted, and the only thing she asked at the very end was whether the men had really closed it, whether the shaft was truly poured all the way to the bottom, whether the thing under the mountain was sealed again for good, or only quieted for a while. She said she still heard it some nights, faint, the way you hear your own pulse in a silent room, and she could never be sure whether the sound was coming from the mountain or only from the memory of it lodged somewhere behind her ribs. No one could tell her for certain, and that is the part they took out of the record. Not because it isn't true, because it is. The land is still closed. The hollow is still empty. The road that used to run up to the Renfro place is grown over now, and the county keeps it that way on purpose. And if you ask why at the courthouse, they will tell you the ground is unstable and leave it at that. But somewhere under the folded country south of the Buffalo River, behind a wall of stone that no one in this world remembers laying, there is a door that was opened once and sealed twice by 2 sisters who understood something. The rest of us were never meant to learn. that the oldest things are not always meant to be found, that some history is buried by hands that loved us, and that some things are chained in the dark not to punish them, but to keep the rest of us breathing for one more quiet, ordinary day. The two sisters never asked to be believed, just to be left be.